As far back as I can remember, I always wanted to be a gangster. We were good fellas, wise guys.
The crime family boss John Gotti, who led the Gambino family from the late 1980s into the early 1990s, and Nicodemo, little Nicky Scarfo, who was boss of the Philadelphia crime family during the majority of the 1980s, were both gangster icons during their era. Both men were bosses during one of the most deadly and violent times in the history of organized crime, and both men got their positions following the gangland-style executions of their former bosses. Both men would also go on to die in federal prison after both were convicted of being responsible for multiple murders. Although Gotti's promotion was due to his own sinister plot against Gambino boss Paul Castellano, Nicky Scarfo would rise to power after his boss Angelo Bruno was killed by Philadelphia crime family consigliere Tony Caponegro, aka Tony Bananas. What would be portrayed as a miscommunication between the commission of the five families and Tony Caponegro regarding the unsanctioned hit on Philly mob boss Angelo Bruno would actually turn out to be part of a more deeper, sinister plot. In order to get into the relationship between John Gotti and Nicky Scarfo, let's first get into how Scarfo came to be boss of the Philly family. The Philadelphia crime family was said to have been founded in 1911, based out of South Philly and controlling areas in and around New Jersey as well as the Delaware Valley. Angelo Bruno was the Philly family's boss from 1959 to 1980 and was said to have run traditional organized crime rackets such as loan sharking, labor racketeering, and bookmaking. Because of Bruno's old school style of gangsterism, and his unwillingness to allow the men in his faction to get involved in narcotics distribution, other members of the Philly family began talking about taking Bruno out. It's said Bruno's own consigliere, Tony Caponegro, took a trip to New York City, requesting to speak with Genovese family front boss Funzy Thierry and Fat Tony Salerno, who were both positioned to look like the leaders of the Genovese family, in order to help the real Genovese boss, Vincent The Chin Gigante, fly under the radar from federal government. Caponegro is said to have asked Thierry and Salerno for permission to whack his boss, Angelo Bruno, and Thierry and Salerno, who were supposedly speaking on behalf of the commission, granted Caponegro the okay. Following his conversation with the Genovese powers that be, Caponegro put the execution into play. March 21st, 1980, after eating dinner at a restaurant in Philadelphia, Bruno arrived home near the corner of 10th Street and Snyder Avenue in South Philly, accompanied by his driver, John Stanford. And Bruno, who was about to smoke a cigarette before exiting the car, rolled his window down when a man in a hooded raincoat walked up on Bruno with a shotgun and blew off the back of his head while he sat in the car. Stanford, who also suffered minor injuries from the blast, is also said to have been in on the murder plot. The story goes that although Caponegro got Thierry and Salerno's permission to execute the hit, that Caponegro was actually played by Thierry. Thierry had a strong dislike for Tony Bananas over a dispute the two men had involving a $2 million a week bookmaking operation in Jersey City. Thierry seen the potential gains he would inherit if he could get Caponegro out of his way, so when Thierry was appointed to be Tony Bananas' intermediary involving the Bruno hit, he decided to make his move. With Caponegro gone, Thierry wouldn't only get full control of the bookmaking territory, but many other interests in New Jersey as well. On top of that, with Bruno gone and a boss more willing to allow members of the Philly faction to get involved in narcotics, Fat Tony Salerno, who's a major player in the heroin business, would be able to make even more money. When Caponegro asked to sanction Bruno's murder, Thierry lied to Caponegro and led him to believe he had the commission's backing. But after the hit was executed and Caponegro, along with his brother-in-law Alfred Salerno and Bruno's underboss Philip Chicken Man Testa, were called to the carpet in front of the commission to answer for the unsanctioned hit of a fellow mob boss, Thierry denied ever granting permission, stating that he only told Tony Bananas to talk things out with Bruno. Following their separate meetings with Fat Tony Salerno at his Palmer Boys social club in East Harlem, Testa put the blame on Caponegro, and Caponegro was then summoned to go see Vinny the Chin and would never be seen again until his body was found in the Bronx on April 18, 1980. A month after Bruno's murder, Caponegro was tortured, beaten, strangled, repeatedly stabbed and shot before his naked body was stuffed into a mortuary bag and put in the trunk of a car with around $300 and $20 bills stuffed in his mouth and inside other parts of his body. His brother-in-law, Alfred Salernos, would also be found on the same day with his body stuffed into a mortuary bag just 4 miles away. He was found with 3 bullet holes behind his right ear and 1 bullet hole behind the left ear. He had a rope tied around his neck, with the autopsy report indicating rope burns on his ankles, wrists, and neck, along with most of the bones in his face being broken. Following the slaying of Bruno, the commission moved to crown Bruno's underboss, Philip Testa, as new boss of the Philly family. A year later, after reopening the books which Bruno had on hold at the time of his death and expanding the family, in a karmic twist of events on March 15, 1981, Testa too would be killed by his underboss, Peter Casella, and one of his capos, Frank Chicky Narducci, being blown to pieces by a nail bomb the two set on the front porch of Testa's home. A gangland execution that would be immortalized into not only Mafia, but pop culture history as well, in the hit song Atlantic City by Bruce Springsteen. Well, they blew up the Chicken Man in Philly last night, now they blew up his house too. Lyrics from Bruce Springsteen's critically acclaimed Nebraska album. Peter Casella was put on the shelf and spared a death sentence for the unsanctioned bombing by the commission only because he had favor amongst one of the leaders. But Frank Chicky Narducci and Narducci's driver, Rocco Marinucci, wouldn't have the same treatment. Philip Testa's son, Salvi Testa, would avenge his father's brutal murder by shooting both of the men dead and stuffing Marinucci's mouth with firecrackers, reportedly because Narducci was the man responsible for choosing the nail bomb method to assassinate his father. According to the medical personnel responding to the shooting, Narducci's last words were, quote, "It didn't hurt." Nicky Scarfo, who took over as boss of the Philly family after Phil Testa's execution, would go on to take Salvi Testa out by putting a contract on his life because Scarfo began to view Salvi as a threat to his regime. On September 14, 1984, Salvi Testa's body would be found dumped on the side of the road wrapped in a tarp inside of a ditch in Gloucester, New Jersey. On September 14, 1984, Salvi Testa's body would be found dumped on the side of the road wrapped in a tarp in a ditch in Gloucester, New Jersey. His cause of death? 2 bullet holes to the back of his head. It's said the ruthless Scarfo, who was not only Salvi Testa's father's successor, but also Salvi's own godfather, ruthlessly employed his godson's own crew to take him out. 2 other members of the Philly faction were also murdered on orders from the commission because of their involvement in the plot against Angelo Bruno. Johnny Keys Simone, a top-tier captain of the Philly family's Newark, New Jersey faction, and Frank the Barracuda Sindone, a soldier in Bruno's organization who was running gambling and loan sharking operations in South Philly. According to Sammy the Bull's podcast, Castellano ordered Johnny Keys to be murdered for the unsanctioned hit, which was an opportunity Sammy the Bull jumped at, giving himself a chance to showcase his talents and prove his capabilities to the bosses. Gravano had Louis Eppolito fire the fatal bullets into Simone. His body was discovered in September of 1980, and Frank Sindone would be found in an alley with a bullet wound to the head on October 29, 1980. Nicky Scarfo's reign as boss began at the beginning of a bloody and violent mafia war that would last nearly a decade, claiming at least 30 lives by the time Nicky Scarfo was locked up in 1989, just on Scarfo's orders alone. Since the inception of the Philadelphia crime family, also known as the Bruno family, the Philly crew had strong ties to the 5 families in New York City, and the violent crew of gangsters was said to have been especially friendly with the Gambino and Genovese families. Up until Angelo Bruno became boss of the family, none of the bosses before him had a seat on the commission, which changed for Bruno because of his close relationship to then Gambino boss Carlo Gambino, solidifying him as true leader of the Philadelphia crime family. Bruno was appointed boss by the commission after the boss before him, Joe Ida, retired, and Ida's replacement, acting boss Antonio Palima, was demoted. Scarfo was said to have plans of running a well-oiled criminal machine. One of his first orders of business was expanding the family's rackets into Atlantic City during a time when gambling had recently become legal in New Jersey, and due to the booming economy, Scarfo was able to infiltrate his way into the construction and service industries. Scarfo also put a tax on all non-mob associated criminals, including drug dealers and business owners. He also got the Philly family heavily involved in methamphetamine trafficking after first extorting Chelsea Boris, the Greek mob boss of Philadelphia at the time, and would go on to have him killed after he moved in on Italian territory and refused to pay the street tax. Upon becoming new boss of the family, Scarfo quickly demoted all of Testa's leadership, including the captains, replacing them with Salvatore Chucky Merlino as underboss, Frank Monti as his consigliere, and for captains, Scarfo promoted his nephew Phil Leonetti and two other men, Lawrence Yogi Merlino and Joseph Chicky Ciancaglini Sr., which would cause even more turmoil from the disgruntled veteran soldiers, just adding more bad energy to the already deadly civil war going on at the time. Scarfo was known for his ruthlessness during his reign as boss. Standing at only 5'5", Scarfo was still said to have instilled fear in his enemies with his violent temper. He was once quoted telling crew members how much he loved what they did while they were tying up the body of an associate Scarfo ordered dead for insulting him and underestimating his power. When Scarfo's nephew Phil Leonetti turned federal cooperator against his uncle in 1988 after riding by his side for nearly 25 years, Scarfo would go down as America's first mob boss to be personally convicted of a murder charge. When Phil Leonetti flipped on his uncle, he gave up some of his uncle's darkest secrets, including the time Scarfo brought his sister's 10-year-old son, a young Phil Leonetti, to give him cover from law enforcement while he was transporting a dead body in the trunk. The Bruno family wasn't only very capable of murder, but also had their hands in many different rackets, including a long-time stronghold in New Jersey. In a newspaper article dated December 19, 1990, it states, "The union that represents the Atlantic City Casino Workers Union is being controlled by the imprisoned Nicodemo, Little Nicky Scarfo," and went on to say federal prosecutors filed a lawsuit seeking to take control of the union, alleging Scarfo and his crew had been dominating the Local 54 union and Restaurant Employees and Bartenders International Union for over 20 years, and were known for being violent, using murder and extortion to maintain control of their territory. The government's complaint charged Scarfo with having had ordered the hits on 2 different union presidents in order to keep control of Local 54, also alleging Scarfo's son, Nicodemo Jr., was a go-between between his father and the Scarfo Bruno crime family acting boss, Anthony Tony Bucks Piccolo, while Scarfo was serving out his sentence in Marion Prison. Although New Jersey was technically supposed to be Philly family territory, there has always been a strong Genovese and Gambino family stronghold. Vincent The Chin Gigante had his man Bobby Manna with his crew stationed in New Jersey, along with many other various Genovese guys stationed in different locations, and same with the Gambinos. One of those crews, which was known as the Cherry Hill Gambinos, were a crew of Sicilian cousins to Carlo Gambino and stationed in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. In 1986, one of the crew's members, Matty Gambino, had gotten into a bar fight over a female with a capo in the Scarfo Bruno family, Phil Narducci. Narducci was the son of the slain Frank Chicky Narducci, and during the fight, Matty Gambino was said to have pulled a gun on Narducci and threatened his life. That move would cause Scarfo to want Gambino whacked for putting his hands on a captain, so with that, Scarfo made arrangements for a sit-down with the freshly appointed Gambino boss John Gotti by calling on his nephew, Phil Leonetti, as told by Leonetti in his book. It's said the 2 ruthless bosses had only met once prior in an introductory meeting in January of 1986, right after Gotti had just had Big Paul clipped and Gotti just became boss. Only 2 months later, Scarfo and Gotti would meet again. Phil Leonetti is said to have made the call to his connection to the Gambino family, Joseph Pal Joey Farinella, who made the arrangements with Sammy The Bull Gravano for Gotti and Scarfo to meet face-to-face at Gravano's brother-in-law's house in Staten Island. Scarfo was only said to have bought his nephew, while it said Gotti showed up with an entourage which included Sammy Gravano, Farinella, and Gotti crew consigliere Joe Gallo. It said Gotti explained he had just took over the family and was still getting his house in order, and apologized for Matty Gambino's reckless actions. He told Scarfo if Gambino disrespected anyone in Scarfo's crew again, he would make him disappear, which would conclude the meeting. Sources had also said Matty apologized to Phil Narducci a few weeks later. According to Sammy the Bull, Gotti and Scarfo met again when Scarfo wanted to murder one of his own men, John Stanford, but apparently reached out to Gotti through Sammy the Bull because Stanford had deep connections to the Gambino family also in Sicily, and Scarfo wanted to prevent a war with Gotti. Gravano claimed it was him, Phil Leonetti, Nicky Scarfo, John Gotti, and Frank DeChico present at the meeting. Sammy said the meeting was concluded when the two men agreed to shelve and banish Stanford from the mob. Not long after Scarfo was arrested on January 8, 1987, Gotti began quickly maneuvering to claim his territories in North Jersey, quickly catching them up to the Genovese family, who had held more power in the state for a long time and was said to be the first of New York's 5 families to plant their flag. The Chin had the Genovese family number 3 man, Louis Bobby Manna, controlling things out of his restaurant in Hoboken. Manna, who operated under Chin's orders, was said to have been largely behind the hit attempts on Gotti and his crew members, actively plotting the murders out with Lucchese boss Anthony Gaspipe Casso. At first, Gotti let it be known he wanted control of all Scarfo's rackets, and was successful for a while over Manna, who was challenging control. Manna was caught on FBI wiretaps, plotting to catch John and Jean Gotti in Woodside, Queens, and have them killed. But Manna would be arrested before he got to Gotti, and the struggle for territory would come to an end after Gotti himself was arrested and sentenced to life in prison in 1992.